you salty sailors, time to raise anchor and set sail for your best scrawny life. Arr!
So the Federal Reserve has cut the prime lending rate a quarter point, and there's talk of perhaps future cuts as well. It was reported they did so in response to indications of a slowing economy. Now, that may be more political spin from the news agency. I didn't hear Chairman Powell's remarks myself, although no doubt those indicators have been out there for some time. Now, I am not an economist. I just pretend to be one on the internet. But let me attempt an analogy here. If you throw a party, and it's a raging good party, and carries on for many hours, but eventually it begins to wind down, and many of the guests are showing signs of being heavily intoxicated. And in fact, a few have even passed out. At this point, can you keep the party going by adding even more alcohol to the punch bowl? Bear in mind that liquidity and debt are just two sides of the same coin in our current system. Lower interest rates, lower taxes, stimulus payments, debt cancellation, these are all inflationary factors. The only thing new that's deflationary are tariffs. And for that reason, I don't think tariffs will go away, even when Donald Trump is no longer president. It has little to do with China or the EU or trade imbalance, and it has much more to do with dealing with the aftermath of wild government spending. Ever since the 2001 terrorist attacks, we've been on a unprecedented campaign to devalue the dollar, and it worked. It was a raging good party for a good number of years. Some people got rich, many people got deeply in debt. And now that there are signs that it's run its course, that the party is winding down, are you just on the edge of your seat waiting for slightly lower interest rates to rush out and borrow a bunch of money? How about the company that you work for? Are they just waiting for some small move in interest rates to rush out and purchase new equipment, retool the shop, whatever it happens to be? If you're holding the accelerator pedal hard against the floor of the vehicle, and yet the vehicle does not continue to accelerate, it may be safe to assume that you are already traveling at the maximum speed the engine is capable of producing, and perhaps you should let off the accelerator before your engine overheats or something worse happens. And now that uncertainty has become the buzzword of the year, perhaps it's time to ask ourselves, is there less certainty with a completely free market, or with the sort of managed economic tinkering we've been experimenting with for the last 25 years? And so we come to the question why. Why continue to go pedal to the metal? Why dump even more alcohol in the punch bowl? Why continue to inflate the money supply? Let's consider a conspiracy theory. Is the money supply being inflated to such a degree that the inevitable correction is so severe it could serve as a pretext for centralizing power in a much more radical and transformative way than we've seen so far with the incrementalism approach? Now, there may be some politicians who would welcome that very thing, but I don't think the majority are conspiring against us. However, Just because they're not conspiring against us doesn't mean that we won't wind up in the same place out of sheer hubris. Let's ignore for a moment the idea that no one is supposed to be above the law and ask the question, is the overall effect of illegal immigration inflationary or deflationary? It depends, of course, on the ratio of those coming to work versus those coming to receive social services. I mean, we hear now of entire cities that once were manufacturing centers, but are now just floating on this social services economy based around illegal immigration. That's money that is borrowed from the Federal Reserve and simply pumped into the economy. It's direct inflation, so that would be inflationary. Now, of those coming to work, if they're willing to accept a lower wage than the average American worker that might have that job otherwise, then hopefully the construction company or whoever they're working for would be willing to pass that savings on to the consumer. The problem is lower prices is not the same as deflation. It's important to remember that inflation is not prices rising, it's the value of the dollar falling. That's why inflation is called a hidden tax. You wake up in the morning, you look at your bank account, it's the same as it was the night before. You say, well, the government didn't take anything from me because the amount of money in my bank account is still the same. But its buying power, its value is less. What they take from you by inflating the money supply is the value of the money that you've saved. Now, needless to say, it's a more complicated issue than I've made it seem here, but the overall effect of illegal immigration is probably inflationary. I'm not trying to stir the pot or trigger people here, just using my special ability to drain all the emotion and intensity out of an issue and just state the bare facts in the most dull and uninteresting way possible. And so if we remove any moral or emotional considerations, perhaps the best immigration policy would be one that's piecemeal. We accept those who can contribute, who are willing to work, and reject those who are coming to receive social services. Now, of course, for some, that would be defeating the purpose. And we may as well ask, is a collapse into a purely social services economy, a socialist type of system, is that an inevitable outcome of a democratic society, as predicted by Alexis de Tocqueville and so forth? Is it a predictable trajectory that a democratic society always follows? And can we change course and still retain the democratic elements of our society? Anyway, as I've said in a previous video, I'm hopeful that the involvement of technology, artificial intelligence and so forth, could lead to a paradigm shift that corrects that inevitable trajectory, or seemingly so. Meanwhile, let's consider another conspiracy theory. Could the Federal Reserve or other shadowy figures in the banking industry be manipulating the business cycle, creating periods of boom and bust, so that there is rapid development during the periods of boom, and then the money supply is tightened at exactly the right moment so that they can reap a harvest of defaults and foreclosures? Well, I don't think so. If that were the case, then their timing seems to be off. I think they've overcooked it, if that's what they were shooting for. Frankly, I do think that if the Federal Reserve had a magic wand they could wave to make this whole headache disappear, I think they would gladly wave it. But perhaps now it's time to ask this question. Is it fair for a generally more frugal state such as Iowa to use the same diluted currency that's more brought about by or more suitable or appropriate to a financially promiscuous state such as California or Illinois? Perhaps the time for a two currency or multiple currency solution has truly come upon us.
Northern rock bass. I haven't seen those in the river for a long time.
Our mystery plant for this episode is Helianthus tuberosus, the Jerusalem artichoke, or the sunchoke. This, of course, is a member of the Asteraceae, the sunflower family, or the composite flower family. This plant does produce an edible tuber rather than a taproot. I don't know which is the best time to dig them up or so forth, but here you can see the flower morphology is similar but different to Helianthus annuus, the common sunflower, or the commercially produced sunflower. And the foliage as well is similar, is sort of between the more heart-shaped leaf of Helianthus annuus and the more lanceolate leaf with the three prominent rib veins of some of the other Asteraceae. The leaves can be opposite on the lower stages, the early growth of the plant, and change to alternate as the stalk emerges. This plant was first cultivated by Native Americans. I remember it being commercially available in the 1980s, I think possibly as sort of a way of diversifying away from monoculture due to a collapse in commodity prices for farm commodities at that time. It has nothing to do with either the city of Jerusalem or with artichokes. In this close-up we can see that the flower, or capitulum, is actually a composite of many individually distinct flowers, or florets. In the center are the disc florets, and around the outside are the ray florets, with what appears to be that single large petal, which is actually several petals fused together. I suppose serving the purpose of attracting pollinators and guiding them in towards the disc florets. You can notice also in the disc florets that some have a protruding style. I believe they produce pollen first, and then that part falls away and they become receptive to pollen, but I could be wrong about that. Alright, so on with our art project. Since the last episode, you can see that I've finished the lettering, and now we're beginning to put some clouds in the sky. This painting on a partially primed canvas that is loose is something I've never done before. I've always wanted to try it, but it kind of acts like the resolution of a digital device. The weave of the canvas, being as exposed as it is, limits the amount of detail. It's sort of like a low resolution capture device. It limits the amount of fine detail, which is easy to put in on a smooth surface. But in this case, the weave of the canvas remains quite rough, and fine detail is just simply broken up by the texture of that weave. So it's going to be somewhat difficult. Now, of course, that changes as you build up layers of paint and so forth. But in this case, we're still working entirely in acrylic, and we'll see what happens. It's an interesting experiment at any rate. Made a few little mistakes in the lettering, but overall I'm not unhappy with it so far.